Welcome back, I'm Osman Lone and this is Indus News. Now our top story is we start from Sudan, where protest leaders have cancelled political negotiations with the ruling military council after 5 school children were killed during demonstrations. Authorities imposed a curfew in the city of Al Abeid after the incident. More in this report.
Hundreds protested in Khartoum in response to opposition calls for nationwide demonstrations. Sudan's military rulers have condemned the killing of school children in the central town of Al Obeid on Tuesday.
The events escalated quickly. Some infiltrators intervened and created a state of chaos, which resulted in the looting of property owned by the Khartoum Bank in El Obeid and an attempt to loot the French bank in El Obeid as well. This led to the fall of a number of martyrs, reaching 5 people up till now.
United Nations has called for an investigation into what protesters said was a massacre. Protest leaders demanded that the ruling military council immediately agree to a final power transition deal. Earlier, the opposition rejected the findings of an investigation into a deadly June raid on a Khartoum sit-in. Protest leaders say the report exonerated the military council from the killings.
The US has formally asked Germany to join France and Britain in a mission to help secure the Strait of Hormuz. The United States says it has sought Berlin's assistance in combating Iranian aggression. The request comes after Britain ordered its navy to escort UK-flagged ships in the Strait of Hormuz last week. A US embassy spokesman has confirmed the move. Tensions between Iran and the US spiked after President Donald Trump withdrew from the Iran nuclear deal last year and reimposed sanctions on Tehran. Since then, a series of attacks on oil tankers in the Strait of Hormuz has heightened tensions. The United Nations has approved Russia's proposed Gulf Security Organization to consolidate political and diplomatic efforts in the region. The Russian Foreign Ministry says the organization will be tasked with implementing a plan to normalize the security situation in the Gulf. It says the group will also seek to settle conflicts in the area. The Russian Foreign Minister says work to create a security system in the Gulf will begin soon with a series of diplomatic consultations. They will of course include members of the UN Security Council, Arab League and the Islamic Cooperation and the Gulf Cooperation Council. Iran has urged China and other friendly countries to buy more of its oil. According to the Chinese Bureau of Statistics, Iranian oil imports have dipped by 60% following US sanctions. Iran's Vice President Ishaq Jahangir says he is aware that these countries face some restrictions. Jahangir told Chinese diplomat Song Tao, who is visiting Tehran, that Iran expects more active trade with Beijing. The United States says it will start withdrawing military troops from Afghanistan next year. US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said President Donald Trump has personally ordered troop numbers to be reduced by next year's elections in November. Indus News has this report.
Speaking in Washington, Pompeo expressed hope that there would be less need for combat forces in Afghanistan by then. The US is scheduled to hold another round of peace talks with the Taliban in Qatar this week.
That's my directive from the President of the United States. He's been unambiguous. End the endless wars. Draw down, reduce. It won't just be us. Those of you who have served know that resolute support has countries from all across Europe and around the world. We hope that overall the need for combat forces in the region is reduced.
All right.
So yes, it's not only my expectation, it would be job enhancing.
Okay.
The United Nations says over 1,300 civilians have been killed and over 2,000 wounded in Afghanistan this year. A UN report says over 700 people were killed by the government forces. More than 500 other civilians died at the hands of militants.
The United States has denied Russia's accusation that it is planning to quit the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. US Ambassador Robert Wood has termed the accusation crafty Soviet-like propaganda. Wood says Russia has well-established patterns of violating treaties. The United States has signed but not ratified the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban.
I have to respond to the sort of crafty Soviet-like propaganda that was espoused earlier during the session by our Russian colleague. We have to remember, this is Russia we're talking about. This is a country that has flouted its Budapest memoranda commitments. It's violated the INF Treaty. The U.S. engaged in over 35 meetings with Russians at different levels to try to resolve this issue. We could not.
Now, the United Nations has said that Russian police appear to have used excessive force against protesters this weekend. Police rounded up over 1,000 protesters in Moscow in one of the biggest crackdowns in recent years. Indus News has this report.
A UN spokesman says Russian authorities may have violated the basic rights to freedom of expression. UN human rights spokesman Rupert Colville questioned the disqualification of 57 opposition candidates from the Moscow city elections. The exclusion of opposition candidates from local polls triggered the protests. The opposition says they were barred for political reasons.
We're concerned that the Russian police appear to have used excessive force against the protesters during the rally in central Moscow on Saturday. We understand excessive use of force, or alleged excessive use of force leading to physical injuries, has been alleged in the case of more than 70 individual demonstrators.
A court in Moscow rejected jailed opposition leader Alexei Navalny's appeal for early release on medical grounds. He was jailed for 30 days last week for urging people to take part in an unauthorized protest. Navalny's lawyer and doctor said he may have been poisoned.
We urge the Russian authorities to allow people to organize and take part in peaceful assemblies without restrictions other than those permitted under international human rights law. And when managing crowds in Russia, as anywhere else, use of force by the police should always be proportionate to the threat, if there is one.
Meanwhile, Russian prosecutors have warned against further unauthorized rallies, saying they will face a crackdown. They also urged extra vigilance in the run-up to the local elections in September.
U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo says he hopes working-level discussions to revive denuclearization talks with North Korea will begin soon. But he did emphasize a follow-up summit of leaders is not planned. Pompeo was speaking at the Economic Club of Washington a day before he travels to Asia. He says another summit between President Donald Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has not been planned. Pompeo and North Korean Foreign Minister Ri Yong-ho are expected to meet in Bangkok this week. A February summit in Vietnam between Trump and Kim collapsed after the two sides failed to reconcile their differences. Now, the personal details of 100 million people across the US have been stolen by a hacker. Credit card company Capital One says the hack also affected 6 million of its Canadian customers. The announcement came after police arrested the suspected hacker. In a statement, the firm said the stolen data included names, addresses and contacts of customers who applied for its credit cards. It said the hacker failed to gain access to credit card account numbers. Capital One is a major credit card issuer in North America, and it also operates retail banks. Now, the European Court of Justice says websites must warn visitors that social media giant Facebook will have access to their data. In a ruling, the court said that companies embedding Facebook's like button on their websites must seek the consent of users. It ordered the companies to follow European Union privacy laws before transferring users' data to the social network. Now, the ruling comes after a German consumer body sued an online retailer for breaching its personal data. The court said websites and Facebook share responsibility for safeguarding users' personal data. Now to the UK, where new Prime Minister Boris Johnson says Britain will leave the European Union on October 31st, no matter what. His remarks come during a telephone conversation with Irish Prime Minister Leo Varadkar. A statement by UK's PM office said that Johnson has made it clear that any exit deal must abolish the Irish backstop. Now, Leo Varadkar says the Brexit withdrawal agreement cannot be reopened. He also invited Mr Johnson to Dublin for talks on Brexit and other bilateral matters. The 52nd ASEAN Foreign Ministers meeting has started in Bangkok. The two-day gathering comes amid growing tensions in the South China Sea. Rising tensions in the area and the fallout from US-China trade war are set to dominate the talks. The foreign ministers of 10 member states, including major global economies, are at the conference. Australia, China, the EU and Japan are among those taking part. The foreign ministers of states participating will also hold bilateral talks on the sidelines of the meeting. Well, we'll be back with more news after this break. Do stay with us. Welcome back, I'm Usman Lone and this is Indus News. Now in Pakistan, 17 people have been killed after a military aircraft crashed into a residential building near Islamabad. Officials say the victims include 5 crew members and 12 residents. Another 12 civilians were injured and are undergoing treatment at a local hospital. The military identified the crew members as 2 colonels and 3 non-commissioned officers. Now we stay with Pakistan, and 24 people have been killed in flash floods across the country. Officials say 16 people died in the port city of Karachi as the first spell of monsoon rain wreaked havoc across southeastern Sindh. Medics say the majority of victims were electrocuted by falling electric lines that fell in pools of rainwater. Pakistan's meteorological department says the storms will continue in the southeast until tomorrow. In northwest Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, 3 people were killed in a roof collapse while 2 others were electrocuted. 3 children have also died in the flash floods following torrential rains. In Yemen, Houthi rebels say airstrikes have killed 13 civilians in northwestern Sada province. The warring sides have blamed each other for the air raid on a market. Medics say 2 children are among the dead. 23 others were wounded in the attack, and Saudi Arabia has not yet confirmed if the attack even took place. Now in Brazil, 57 inmates have been killed in a prison riot in the country's northern Pará state. Prison authorities say that 16 inmates were decapitated while others were suffocated after part of the prison was set on fire. Officials from the jail said gang members from one prison block invaded another part of the jail in Altamira. They said the riot lasted for almost 5 hours. 2 officers were taken hostage but have now been freed. Brazil has around 750,000 prisoners, and that's the 3rd highest in the world. President Jair Bolsonaro has promised to build more jails and impose tighter controls. 5 people have been killed and 2 others wounded in Wisconsin in the United States in the 3rd mass shooting to hit the US in 2 days. Police say the shooter murdered 3 members of a family at their home in a small Wisconsin town. After that, he went to another home nearby and opened fire. Police officers found the gunman and another person dead when they reached the scene. This comes after 4 people were shot dead and 12 others wounded at a shooting in a California festival. Well, do stay with us. We'll be back after this short break. Welcome back to Indus News. Now, a Bosnian man linked to the 2015 Paris attacks has been extradited to Belgium from Germany. The unnamed 39-year-old suspect is accused of procuring weapons for the attackers who killed 130 people. According to German reports, the suspect's DNA was found on weapons used in the attack. Last month, German authorities announced the arrest on a European Union warrant. Now, Greece says Turkey's exploration for natural gas off Cyprus is impeding the European Union's energy planning. Greek Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis says stopping Ankara's drilling activities in the eastern Mediterranean is his top priority. Speaking on his visit to Nicosia, Mitsotakis and Cypriot President Nikos Anastasiades discussed a joint strategy to resolve the standoff with Turkey. The EU recently imposed sanctions on Turkey, accusing it of violating Cypriot sovereignty. But Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan is adamant that Ankara has acted according to international law. Now, well-known teen climate activist Greta Thunberg will ride across the Atlantic by boat to attend 2 climate conferences. Climate activist Thunberg will leave aboard the Malaysia 2 yacht built to sail around the globe. Earlier, she refused to fly to New York because of the environmental impact of air travel. She will later continue her journey by low-carbon transport to the annual Santiago Climate Change Conference in December. Greta's father and a filmmaker will accompany her on the voyage, which will take 2 weeks to complete. In August last year, Thunberg started a weekly school strike on Fridays, calling for greater action on climate change. Wildfires have ravaged in Russia's Siberian Krasnoyarsk region, consuming 1 million hectares of forest in the past 3 days. The emergency ministry has issued evacuation alerts to towns and villages near the spreading blaze. The wildfire centre says the absence of rain, coupled with temperatures of up to 30 degrees, sparked the inferno. Gusts of wind and dry thunderstorms have worsened the situation. A state of emergency has been declared in the region and access to all forests has been restricted. Now, while some countries losing their forests, Ethiopia has launched a major drive to regenerate its own. The idea is to plant hundreds of millions of trees, and with them the aim to stop the march of the desert and conserve soil. Indus News has this report.
Planting 1 or 2 trees may not seem like hard work. Ethiopia's Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed has led a campaign to plant 350 million of them in 1 day. It's part of his Green Legacy initiative, a drive to put 4 billion trees into the ground. In the early 20th century, 34% of the country was under forest cover. Now it's 4%.
The rate of deforestation and the expansion of desertification, even at a global level, is because of the destruction of forests.
Volunteers planted trees at 1,000 sites across the country, overseen by officials. Government workers were given time off to take part. The initiative is seen as hugely important.
The issue of environment is of major concern, even at the global level, but more so for this country.
The long-term plan is to reduce desertification and regenerate the land in the drought-prone country.
Now, China's city of Aksu has won a 30-year-long war against erosion. Its successful ecological campaign has turned swathes of desert into a thriving forest. More in this report.
In 1986, the western Chinese city of Aksu began an ambitious tree planting project. Located on the edge of the Taklamakan Desert, Aksu used to be buried in sand for most of the year. Experts fought dust storms to engineer a green miracle.
To prevent water from escaping, we lay down in a ditch like this, using our bodies to block the holes.
Citizens and specialists worked relentlessly over the decades to bring fertility to the wasteland. The 13 million acre oasis has now made agriculture a pillar of the local economy. Once a sea of sand, Aksu is now renowned in China for its apples, dates and walnuts.
Paleontologists have found a giant dinosaur footprint fossil in China's eastern province of Jiangxi. This is the first ever discovery of the Tyrannosaurus made by experts from China and the United States. Top scientists have ratified the track found at a construction site. The paleontologists inferred the track marker's body length from the footprint, and they have suggested the dinosaur can be as long as 7.5 meters. The fossil has been unveiled to the public in Yinglang Stone Nature History Museum. A Singaporean engineering company has built a robot that can serve up a hot bowl of laksa. The noodle soup, that's what laksa is one of the city-state's most known dishes. More details in this report.
A piping hot bowl of soup is the perfect complement to the cold weather. A robot has been created to feed lovers of laksa, which is a local dish of rice noodles served in a curry sauce. The electric sous chef can serve a bowl of this noodle soup dish in record time of just 45 seconds. The robot, called Sophie by its creators, can blanch noodles, add pre-cooked prawns, and ladle spicy coconut soup.
It's excellent. I would say there's no difference between the one created by the robot and the human.
The robot will let chefs cut down on repetitive tasks and focus on understanding customers' needs. Another local firm said it will roll out 300 robot cleaners by March next year to help clean hotels, shopping malls, and government buildings.
We have to actually be very precise in every step of doing the laksa. That include having the prawn in the laksa as well. They have to actually be very precise, and they have to do programming just to capture one prawn at a time. And when it comes to the gravy, they have to make sure that the gravy doesn't spill as well.
The robots can actually speak to the client, help them with the laksa, and top up the ingredients and clean up the stations as well.
Okay, thank you. In the Bolivian town of La Paz, children are spurred on by their parents and they're nurturing their Formula One racing dreams. The local boxcar competition does not only serve as a healthy physical activity, but also a bonding experience for all the family. More in this report.
In the early 1950s, Bolivians adopted the American box cart racing and have never looked back since. It has now become an event local families in La Paz look forward to. The craft of kart making and the pride of victory has been passed on for 3 generations now. Kart driver Ovidio Paz says the event boosts children's mental and physical strength.
We are providing the kids with strength, that they go without falling over, starting and finishing, that the Lord watches and protects them. It is a joy to participate in this version of the motorless car race.
Unlike its American version, the go-kart racing in La Paz has additional challenges, mostly due to its topography. Located at 3,700 meters above the sea level, participants have to contend with a steep incline.
Now, amateur divers have plunged into a part of history as they jump from Mostar's old bridge in Bosnia. This was part of a competition that happens every year celebrating the Ottoman landmark. More details in this report.
Bosnia marked the post-war reconstruction of Mostar's old bridge with an annual diving competition. Originally built by the Ottomans more than 450 years ago, it was destroyed by Bosnian Croat forces during the 1992-95 war. It was later rebuilt in a complicated reconstruction effort and opened again in 2004. The bridge is a symbol of reconciliation as it connects the city's 2 halves inhabited by Catholic Croats and Muslim Bosniaks.
We used to treat the old bridge as a living creature. Divers would clean it and polish it and take care of it. It served us for 5 centuries. The bridge was then made a sort of brother of the original old bridge, and we hope that it will outlive us and see many, many more years, maybe 1,000 years more.
Diving in either head first or feet first, people compete to jump into the shallow, icy cold waters of the Niretwa River. The diving competition is thought to have been going on for centuries, but was only officiated in 1968.
Well, we'll be back with the top stories from the world of business and sports after the break. Well, we start our business news with Chinese tech giant Huawei, which has reported a sharp jump in revenue in the first half of the year, despite US restrictions. Huawei said revenue soared by about 23% because of increased smartphone sales and 5G network contracts. It said smartphone sales surged to more than $58 billion, while shipments increased by 24%. The tech giant said it shipped 118 million smartphone units between January and June. Now, to date, Huawei has secured 50 commercial contracts for its 5G networking operations. US President Donald Trump has claimed China doesn't want to sign a trade deal before the US elections next year. He warned Beijing against waiting out his first term in office to finalize a trade deal. Trump went on to say that there will either be no deal or a tough one if he wins re-election in November. This comes as a US delegation arrived in Shanghai ahead of crucial trade talks with China tomorrow. The two sides are meeting for the first time since negotiations broke down in May. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer and Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin will lead the US team during the talks. European stock markets are flat after warnings of poor corporate earnings. The UK's FTSE 100 has bucked the trend in early trading but has since retreated. Germany's DAX is down nearly 1.5% after a grim profit forecast was issued for chemicals giant Bayer and Lufthansa Airlines. France's CAC 40 is also down by 0.75%. Earlier, the Asian markets closed in positive territory. The Nikkei 225 gained nearly 0.5% after the Bank of Japan kept its low interest rates unchanged. Mainland Chinese shares in Hong Kong's Hang Seng were also up ahead of trade talks with the United States. Oil prices are nearly up 1% on expectations of a US interest rate cut later this week. Well, let's take a look at the weather around the world. Well, that's all the news for now, but do stay with us as headlines are next.